All right, hi everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Rebecca Martin. I'm a business development manager here at Real Story Group, and I hope everybody's doing well. And happy August to all of you. I don't know if you're as shocked as I am that we're here already. So today we have an informative session planned all around the conversation of enterprise social collaboration. We're calling it Enterprise Social Collaboration Technology 101. And where we're going to address today is some of the frustrations as well as the tough and confusing questions that you face as digital workplace leaders when it comes to these different technologies. So our hope today is that you're going to leave here knowing more about what exactly is social collaboration, how it's defined, how you can connect leader and employee aspirations in a business context, and then finally, is this measurable? We're going to share today some ways that you can measure how effective you really are at this. So before we get started, just a few quick mentions. For those of you on the call, as a follow-up, we're going to be passing along the slides, and we'll send that out via email. For the subscribers on the line, an archived version of today's webinar is going to be made available to you as a reference. You'll see that when you log in. And then finally, if you have any questions as we move through the presentation, feel free to type your question up in the chat window, and we'll be sure to address it. So with so many new names joining today's webinar, I think it's important to share a bit about who we are. So I thought I'd start with just a quick 2-minute overview of who we are here at Real Story Group and really describe the foundation of our company, which is our approach to our research. So who is Real Story Group? Well, we're a research and advisory firm. So we're similar to some of the other research firms that you've heard of out there, like Forrester or Gartner, who produce research, but we're different in several, and I guess I'd say some really important ways. We're really focused on what we call content-based technologies. And what we mean is that we're looking at 7 different marketplaces and following the products and the vendors within those 7 marketplaces. So if you were to bucket those marketplaces into 2 larger groups, what we're focusing on is really content-based digital marketing technologies and content-based digital workplace technology. So really technology for getting the right content to the right person outside of the organization, and technology for getting content to the right person inside the organization. So we've been around for 15 years looking solely at these content-based technologies. So we feel like we know them pretty well, and we've been following some of these vendors for up to 15 years, and we've seen their progression. But really what our company is designed to do is highlight what these products are good at, but maybe more importantly for the buyers is what they're not so good at. And we're constantly trying to educate our customers as to which technology is the right fit for what it is that you're trying to do. So we were founded 15 years ago by Tony Byrne, and he founded Real Story Group in the vein of a consumer report. So people very much know us as a bit like the consumer reports of this space, and that manifests itself in a couple of ways. So first, like I mentioned, we produce research and we provide deep dive evaluations on the vendors and their products. And again, we have a methodology on evaluating them on a variety of different criteria, but fundamentally getting into what they're good at, where they're a good fit, and what they're not so good at. But I guess to take that consumer reports analogy a bit further, this is probably the biggest differentiator of Real Story Group. So while we follow about 150 different products from about 120 different vendors, we do not work for these vendors in any way. So we don't advise technology vendors on their product strategy. We don't write white papers for technology vendors. We don't speak at their conferences. We don't even take a cup of coffee from technology vendors. And this, believe it or not, is what we have found to be unique in the analyst space. We have yet to find another analyst firm out that adheres to this type of business model, but because we're able to keep to that strict independence, this allows us to give you, the buyers of technology, the real story. And that's where our name has come from. And I believe the industry term for this is that we're on the buy side of the analyst firms out there. And there's really very few, if any, that focus on this buy side. So hopefully that was a helpful overview of who we are at Real Story Group and really the foundation of our research. I think it makes sense now. I'm going to turn this over to Jared Gingras. He's an analyst here at Real Story Group and managing director, and he's going to pick up the conversation at this point and lead you through today's discussion on social collaboration technology 101. So Jared, at this point, I'm going to turn over to you.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you all for joining us. We do appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedules. And so I figured I'd start today talking about this Social Collaboration 101 with a little bit about why we need a Social Collaboration 101 presentation. And one of the main reasons is that I have the privilege of going to a lot of conferences, and at these conferences recently I've been hearing a lot about the future of social collaboration. Lots of presentations on things like virtual reality, lots of things about the Internet of Things and wearables and AI, artificial intelligence, and robot learning and machine learning. And what we kept thinking here as we're getting bombarded with this constant future looking, is that this is really not matching up with a lot of what we're hearing from our clients on a day-to-day basis, our subscribers on a day-to-day basis. In reality, what many of you, I imagine, are encountering on a day-to-day basis are really the basics of social collaboration. And so while this future gazing is really important and it's good, and I think there's a lot of value there, and I think that in many ways that's where this is headed, it is important not to lose sight of the basics of what social networking is, what collaboration around projects and teams really is, and today we're gonna talk a little bit about that foundational basics of social collaboration technology and what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis working with our subscribers and other clients. So as Rebecca mentioned, we're going to break this up into three parts. I'm going to start quickly with some quick definitions around what is social collaboration, and at least how we define it here at Real Story Group. We're going to talk about how we connect leaders and their employees' aspirations in a business context. I'll give you some tools to do that. And then finally, how can we measure how good we are at this? How do everyone thinks they're behind in this kind of thing, and we want to give you some tips and tools on how to really assess where you're at and where you're ahead of the game, where you might be behind. All right, so let's get into the definitions. So I think there's two terms when we talk about this type of technology that always get bubbled up to the top. One is collaboration, the other word is networking. And so from our definitions, we define collaboration as working jointly on an activity towards a common goal. Contrast this with networking, whereas you're connecting with others, but it's usually outside the context of a specific goal. And so when you think about this from a workplace perspective, particularly a digital workplace perspective, you as knowledge workers probably want a little bit of both. You probably want to network with different colleagues, but in many cases you want to collaborate on a very specific task. And in today's digital workplaces, there's always a combination of needs here. However, what we found from a technology perspective is that very few vendors, if any, are really capable and poised to give you the networking capabilities that you need, as well as the collaboration capabilities that you need. Oftentimes, we're finding organizations have to go to two separate places to get both of these types of functionalities, and that can be a little frustrating for some who expect to get a little bit of both, or a lot of both in some cases. So with that as sort of a background, let's talk about how we connect the enterprise's needs and individual employees' needs. So one of the things that we're seeing on a regular basis is executives coming to us and say, hey, we have a challenge here. We want to be able to collaborate more in our enterprise. All well and good, but then when we go speak to the staff within organizations, no one's talking about collaborating more. People are all saying, I just need the right answers. and help me get to the right answers quickly. Whether that's finding right answers through another person or through a system or processes, I don't care. Just help me get to the right answers as fast, as quickly, and as accurately as possible. And so there's a bit of a challenge there. And what we have kind of honed in here is that the way you close this gap from what leaders want and what staff want is usually through very specific business applications that really help employees collaborate, but at the same time get them the really practical answers that they need in a really quick and efficient way. So we're going to talk a lot about what we mean by this business applications. Here's our application archetypes that we are constantly looking at when evaluating this social collaboration technology space. It's on a bit of a spectrum here. If you look up the left side of this axis, we go from a state of informal and unstructured to much more formal and structured. And at the bottom axis, we're looking at things that are much more collaboration oriented. So again, around much more task aligned to much more networking oriented. And what we've found is that certain technology is fundamentally built for several of these archetypes, but very few, actually I'll go as far to say that no technology is really fundamentally suited to do all of these different things. And so let's take you through a couple of these and talk about what we're looking at when we talk about these types of application archetypes. So one of the classic ways to use this type of technology is for knowledge-based management. And here what we're talking about is a very structured way of making policies, procedures, manuals, guides findable for your staff and employees. Moving down the spectrum, there's a different type of collaboration, but it's also very structured. And this is something around collaboration around projects. I'm sure many of you work on projects that have a beginning and an end, and you learn lessons from each of those projects, and you want to apply those to the next project and not recreate the wheel every time you start a new project. So the goal of project type collaboration is to accelerate repeatable team efforts on an ongoing basis. Then we have the notion of communities that are really in the middle of this spectrum between unstructured and structured, and collaboration and networking, and really the idea here is to share best practices from projects, or share best practices of working or around some like-minded individuals, or some people, maybe some communities around some like interests among your organization or outside your organization. But it's a way that you can share some best practices. Enterprise conversation is a popular way to look at networking within an enterprise. And typically here, it's to socialize change within an organization. So think about it as sort of that virtual water cooler, if you will, where you're able to have some conversations across the enterprise in a digital manner. And you can start to have some of those conversations outside of projects, outside of teams, but at an enterprise level. The other one we wanted to talk about a little bit, and I'll show you some examples of this in a few moments, but social Q&A, where this is an application where you will want to leverage the knowledge of your organization in a way where you can pose a question to your peers and get some answers. It's a way of mining that knowledge base that exists, but in a much more informal way than a pure knowledge base. And then finally, expertise location. You know people within your organizations have certain expertise and experience, and there's technology out there that is built to facilitate you finding these skill sets and helping you get to the right answers in a way that is quick and efficient. So what we've found is, I highlight these six archetypes out of this group intentionally, because what we've found for many organizations is these six in particular are sort of the table stakes that organizations need to have in order to be successful social collaboration services within their digital workplace. So it's not to say that innovation support and external collaboration and socializing legacy processes and enterprise networking aren't important. They certainly are for many organizations, but what we found, among our subscribers is that these six in particular are almost are really the place to start. If you don't have this, it's hard to go on to some of these other areas. But so I would, if you need to do some prioritization, focus on these six to start, I would suggest. And then finally, one final point here is that in those organizations who have taken a real employee-centric approach to their digital workplace tend to manage these applications as products themselves. So instead of thinking about this as just having someone manage SharePoint that might do some of these types of services, rather you have people that are managing your project collaboration space, your community application, your enterprise conversation application, your social Q&A application. And if you manage those individual applications as products, you're going to have much more success in meeting the everyday needs of your constituents. So the reason we focus on those applications so much is because we have seen many organizations get into trouble when they go about selecting technology for their needs, and instead of starting at that application type view, they start by looking at this technology through the lens of functional services that the technology may or may not offer. And this is dangerous. And here's the example that we have here where we pull from our research on SharePoint. So if we were to evaluate SharePoint, and we do, on its functional services, you can see here SharePoint actually gets a piece of the pie in our ratings for every single one of these functional services. And SharePoint markets itself as being able to do all these things, and they're not lying. SharePoint can do all of these different things. And so from a feature perspective, SharePoint is feature complete. However, what SharePoint is missing is key business applications. So if we start to say, okay, I have blogging functionality and wiki functionality, but how does that relate to creating an innovation support application? I'm going to have a hard time doing that. And so when we look at SharePoint in particular, it really only gets mediocre, middling ratings in a few different areas. And we talk about SharePoint because they're easy to pick on, but we're not just picking on Microsoft here. We just showed you how Microsoft has, if we were to pinpoint their application strength, is probably on the more structured side of things, particularly knowledge-based management and project collaboration. But other big vendors like IBM, their strengths lie in things like communities and expertise location, and Oracle is really pretty good at socializing legacy processes. But if you're trying to do some of these other things, it's not to say that you can't. It's just going to say, what I want to say is that it's just harder to do. You're going to need to do a lot more customization to get these tools to satisfy your needs in the areas that they're not fundamentally built for. So let's talk about some examples just to make this a little bit more real. Here's an example of an ideation or innovation support application. Fundamentally, as you can see this screen, it's a place for people to submit ideas for an organization. It's like the suggestion box of old. At its core, this looks like any other bulletin board type functionality, but when it comes to building something that's very much tailored to this notion of innovation support, what you get is a set of other features, such as the ability to rank the ideas. So it's not just posting ideas and having some commenting happening in the background. You have the ability to rate up ideas. You have the ability to to vote on things for a specific period of time and show progress over time. Um, you have the you have the ability in some of these innovation support applications to have people build on each other's ideas and work collaboratively to come up with a more thought out solution to a problem that an enterprise has, and that's really powerful. And then again, that's just something that was built to address a very specific need within an organization. Likewise, when we look at things like official knowledge bases, this is an example from Confluence where, it's easy to think about a knowledge base as just a database where you're able to post your tried and true pieces of information and knowledge within your organization. But the what we found is the tools that were fundamentally built for this use case have really taken it to another level in the sense of really thinking about some of the nuances here. Really putting an emphasis on helping people find the answers to their questions really quickly. So in this case, they put the search box front and center, but they also allow people to browse and traverse the knowledge base by topic and maybe multiple nodes of a taxonomy to drill down to what they need, as well as allowing for people to get more help when they need to. In addition, as many of you are undoubtedly familiar with the notion of knowledge bases, in many cases you want to apply some workflow before something gets posted to a knowledge base. So knowledge base applications typically have some workflow built in with some approval processes. Not something you get from just run-of-the-mill collaboration software. And finally, here's an example from Jive where we talk about expertise location. And again, it's not just a directory that you get out of the box with some of these tools. The more sophisticated expertise location applications have really gone into thinking through the idea of not only matching you up with people who self-identify as having a particular skill, but maybe they you show their connections to other people, and maybe that facilitates how you get in touch with this person because, hey, you have a friend in common or a colleague in common that you're familiar that you feel comfortable going to and say, hey, can you put me in contact with Bill because I need to ask him about some product marketing that we have coming up, something like that. All right, so the third piece in this topic today is how do we know how well we're doing here? And that's an interesting thing. Like I mentioned at the outset, everyone thinks they're behind, and in many cases, what we found among our clients is that you're probably not as far behind as you think. We did some surveys in the past few years that have been available to our subscribers, and if you want to log into your account, you can see the full results of this survey that we did back in 2014 and 2016. One of the things that we asked was concerning the maturity of these different types of applications within your enterprise. Some of the interesting things that we found is some of the more structured type of collaboration, some of the more traditional types of collaboration were rated in just around the 50% mark, while some of the more social use cases are certainly less mature within organizations. So, when we talk to organizations about some of these use cases, everyone always thinks that other people are doing it so much better than they are, and that's just really not the case. Everyone's kind of in the same boat here, struggling with rolling these out. And some of the reasons for that struggle, we think, is because people are trying to use the wrong tools for building out some of these applications. And I think the organizations that have really selected the right tools for the right end use cases are the ones that are really seeing some maturity happen within these different application archetypes. I don't want to be completely negative though, because one of the takeaways from our latest survey that we completed in 2016, we compared our overall maturity of some of the the use cases, particularly some of the more traditional use cases, we have seen an uptick in maturity. So it's not like these are static. People are continuing to improve. These systems are maturing. I think that's a trend across the board, but it's slow. These aren't dramatic increases, and I think there's positivity that should be taken away here, that people are improving in these areas and seeing some maturity that just wasn't there in the past, and that should be encouraging. Another way to see how you stack up versus your peers is to do some benchmarking. And I know that benchmarking is very difficult. There's um, a lot of want for really solid data in seeing how others are approaching not only technologies, but the organization, the processes, and skill sets that you need to be successful with a particular technology. But I will say that there's not a lot of great data out there, which is what led us in the last 2 years to build something that we call the Real Score Effectiveness Model. And I encourage you all to give this a shot. You can try it out for free on our website. Just go to realstorygroup.com/realscore, and you can do an assessment of your own organization against a model where we do an evaluation of how effective you're being in three main dimensions: organizational development, business capabilities, and the systems itself, so that you're able to get a score, and we call it your real score of how you match up against the model. And then if you're a subscriber, you can certainly dissect your results even more. There you can then take your score and see how you stack up against your peers in your industry and your peers across industry. So in this kind of fictional client, they got a raw score of 22 out of a possible 60 when they went through and rated themselves on this effectiveness spectrum. And their 22 was slightly behind their peers in the manufacturing industry, and even further behind the cross-industry average. So that can be informative, but we challenge all of our subscribers to actually take it to the next level and really dig into the details, and see the areas that you are really behind in, and identify the areas that you're doing okay in. So in this organization, from an analytics and optimization perspective, they're doing okay. But from a culture and alignment perspective and a community management perspective, they're really behind their peers in their industry, and really behind their cross-industry peers. And so by looking at this and seeing how you stack up, you need to ask yourself the question, first of all, are these things really important to us? And if they are, let's maybe put this on our roadmap and try to put some investment into the things that we want to try to move the needle in. And again, as we've gone through this, I think the couple key takeaways of working with our clients in going through that assessment type of situation is, you're not as far behind as you might think in most cases. Everyone's kind of trying to figure this out. When it comes to some of those more structured scenarios, people are a little bit further along, but the more sexier topics that fall into some of those more of those enterprise networking type things, type applications, you're probably not as far behind as you think. And everyone's kind of still early days in this and trying to figure out the best way to make the best use of this across their enterprise. But I did want to reiterate that if there's one reason that we see organizations struggling, it's fundamentally picking the wrong technology for the job. And part of the problem there is there are a ton of options. This is our famous or infamous look at the marketplace across 7 different areas that we cover. There are a lot of options out there. A lot of vendors call themselves social collaboration vendors, and that can be very confusing and distracting as a buyer, and can lead to some mistakes. If we boil this down to just pulling out the red line, if you will, these are the vendors that we cover from a social collaboration standpoint. And like I said earlier, none of these check all the boxes when it comes to those applications that we looked at. But certain vendors have strengths in certain areas, and those are the vendors that you want to align with the applications and the types of applications that are most important to you and your organization. If you can do that, your chances of success are much better in the long run. So I know we're running really short on time here, and with that, I'll turn it over to Rebecca to just do a quick wrap up while I check to see if there's any questions.
Perfect. Thanks, Jared. Good information. So Jared has shared a lot of information. You know, at the beginning of the webinar, we talked about some of the tough and confusing questions that you face as digital leaders within the organization. So today we hope you're leaving here with a better understanding of social collaboration, you know, the connection points between leader and employee aspirations, and really a new way to measure your effectiveness in this area with RealScore. So I'm going to leave each of you with two things that I think will be a valuable use of your time. So the first thing, if you haven't already, you can download a free excerpt of our Enterprise Collaboration and Social Software Research off of our website, so realstorygroup.com. It'll give you an idea of the technical depth of our research that we provide on the 26 different vendors that we evaluate in this marketplace. So as Jared mentioned, we don't work for vendors, so what you'll notice in the excerpt that you download is the blunt nature that we take in describing the strengths and the weaknesses of the products that we analyze. The second thing I would leave you with is what Jared had just talked about, which was RealScore. So you can demo the RealScore application for free. If you go to our site under Tools, you'll select RealScore, and we have the assessment on all of our topics. So you'd want to select Enterprise Social Collaboration, and then it's going to walk you through your assessment. So you're going to see how you can benchmark against the peers in your industry and really visualize where it is that you need to go. So we're fully transparent here at Real Story Group on pricing. So both the vendor evaluations on enterprise social collaboration products, as well as the RealScore subscriptions, they're all listed on our subscribe page. And then just a quick mention, if you choose to get both the vendor evaluations and a subscription to RealScore, you'll get one at half price. So hopefully you found today's session helpful. Any further questions, you can either chat with us on our website, or you can email us at engage@realstorygroup.com. Again, that's engage@realstorygroup.com. All right, Jared, any questions that you'd like to take before we wrap up?
Yeah, just one. So one question from Tom about how do we truly know that the vendors on our shortlist are a good fit for what it is we're trying to do? It's a great question, and it's one of the things that we're trying to answer on a daily basis for our subscribers. And you know, I hope you do your homework and use some research to get to that short list initially. You know, we have tools and research that is designed to get you to exactly that point. But once you get to that point, I think you're right. You need to take it a step further and do some really solid hands-on testing to see if these tools and vendors can truly meet your needs. You know, when we're guiding our clients through a selection process, we try to create a situation where you really test the vendors to their suitability for your needs. So you try to create an environment that really paints a picture of what it is you're trying to do and allows the vendors to come in and demonstrate and really prove to you that they can meet your needs. This type of an empirical test-based approach is really the only way that you're going to be sure that the people that you're working with and the technologies that you're working with are truly a good fit. And so happy to talk about that more. If anyone has any questions, feel free to contact me. My email's on the screen. Feel free to connect via LinkedIn. Happy to have the conversation there as well. But with that said, I thank you all again for your time today. We will be providing a copy of the slides. I just got a late question around that, and Rebecca will follow up with you on that. But with that said, thank you all again for your time today, and we hope to see you on our next webinar. Thank you.